Hi, my name is Philip Canner. I'm a senior consultant at Team Consulting. Team Consulting is a medical device design consultancy based in Cambridge in the UK. And in 2013, we completed a technology feasibility study proving the principle of one of our own inventions, the Occoris dry powder inhaler aerosolization engine. And I'm here today to talk to you about the challenges of API-only delivery, or active pharmaceutical ingredient-only delivery. To give you a bit of context, what is Occoris? So Occoris isn't an inhaler, but it's a dry powder aerosolization engine. So it's the engine inside a dry powder inhaler which takes the dry powder and turns it into an aerosol. It's an active technology, which means that it contains an energy source to aerosolize the powder. So unlike a lot of dry powder inhalers, it doesn't take the energy from the patient's breath to take the dry powder into an aerosol, but it uses an energy source within the inhaler to do that. It is active, but it's non-electromechanical, which means it doesn't have any batteries or motors or anything like that. A key thing about Occoris is that it's API only. So the pure drug doesn't need to be mixed with carrier particles. You can just use pure drug. And as far as we know, it works with pure micronized drug, so the drug doesn't even need any special particle engineering. We've used just pure jet milled drug. Occoris is also a platform technology, so it's designed such that it can be used in a wide range of dry powder inhaler designs. So we've put together a few concepts for how it could be used. It could be inside a single dose disposable dry powder inhaler, or it could be inside a more typical multi-dose inhaler for treatments such as asthma or COPD. And another concept is that it could be used inside a single dose reloadable inhaler, which you might use for treating things like migraines. Now, I need to say that this talk isn't going to say about how Occoris works. But what I can say is that when we started the project, it didn't work. But through the project, we came up with a bit of a breakthrough, and now it works pretty well. So this talk is about the challenges of API-only delivery, because Occoris is an API-only delivery engine. However, I'm a mechanical engineer. I'm not a respiratory physicist or a formulation scientist. So for me, a key question, as well as what the challenges of API-only delivery are, was why would you choose to pursue this sort of technology in the first place? As I said, when we started, it didn't even work. If we explore this a little bit more deeply, the dry powder inhaler situation today, well, the DPI market is dominated by passive devices with carrier blend. So passive devices meaning they take their energy from the user's inhalation to aerosolize the drug, and they use carrier blends. So the drug is mixed with a carrier such as lactose to carry the drug while it's in the inhaler. And the market is dominated by these devices at the moment. API-only delivery would be great, but it's really difficult, and we'll talk a bit more about why that is later. Now, active devices, so devices with their own energy source, they enable API-only delivery, and being active, they've got performance advantages all of their own over the passive devices. However, active devices are nothing new. They've been around they've been developed for over 20 years, and as yet, they're unproven commercially. Combine with the fact that there are new carrier-free formulation techniques which provide a lot of the advantages that active delivery promises, whilst still using passive devices. So why would you pursue active API-only delivery at all? If we look at this chart, this is our view of the DPI market today. On the x-axis, we've got cost going from high to low, so the further to the right you go, the lower the cost of the device. And on the y-axis, you've got performance of the device. So as you get higher performance. We think active devices generally sit somewhere here, so they're high performance, but relatively high cost. Passive devices tend to be lower performance than active devices, but they are also lower cost generally. And at the moment, passive devices are dominating the market, and active devices have yet to hit the shelves and stay there. So jumping straight into it, why is it difficult to deliver pure API? Well, it's all about the size. So to get drug into the deep lung, the particles of drug need to be about 1 to 5 microns in diameter, so roughly a 50th of the size of a human hair. With particles that small, it is extremely difficult to get energy into the particles to disperse them efficiently and to take them into an aerosol. Plus, they're so small that even if you do get them moving, if they come close to a stationary surface inside the inhaler, so they come close to a side wall or something, they're so small that they can get trapped in the boundary layer. So that's the layer of air next to the surface, which it doesn't move. So these particles are so small they can get into that boundary layer and then they won't move any further. Plus, they are so small, they've got a very large surface area to volume ratio, which means that they are very cohesive, so they stick to each other very easily, and they're very adhesive, so they stick to other things very easily. So they're incredibly sticky. Plus, this large surface area to volume ratio also means that they're susceptible to acquiring really high specific charges, so really high electrostatic charges, just making them even harder to handle. So not only are they tiny, it is incredibly difficult to fill the devices and to meter the doses. If we think about a typical therapeutic dose for asthma and COPD, the actual amount of drug being delivered to where it's needed is in the tens to hundreds of micrograms. Now, typical filling technologies currently available, the lowest standard fill mass they can deliver is around 500 micrograms. So basically, you can't fill the inhaler with such tiny amounts of drug. And just to make matters worse, API tends to be is typically hydrophilic, so it's highly susceptible to the humidity of the surrounding air. If it's humid, if it's wet, the particles pick up moisture, making them incredibly sticky. And if they're dry, the particles are more likely to pick up static charge, making them incredibly adhesive. So they are a real pain to handle. So how is this typically dealt with? So most inhalers, what they do is they use a carrier blend. So this is where the 1 to 5 micron API particles, so the drug particles, they adhere to larger carrier particles, which might be made out of lactose, which are around 60 to 100 microns. Now, this bulks up the powder and makes it suddenly you can handle it and you can meter it and you can fill it because you've got a powder which is much easier to handle. Then, to load the inhaler with this carrier API blend, and then it's the job of the inhaler to get the API off the carrier particles because the carrier particles are too large to get down into the deep lung. So you need to get the API off them and then the API can get into the lung. Inhalers use a variety of deagglomeration principles, so a variety of ways of getting the API off the carrier. They might be using cyclones, such as the Novalizer or the Starhaler. They might use Venturi effects, such as the Accuhaler, or they might use impaction effects, such as the Prohaler. It's been shown that inertial forces, such as impaction, are the most successful ways of getting API off the carrier. So basically, you want to get that carrier particle covered in API, get that moving as fast as possible, and then slam it into something to knock the API off. And that tends to work the best. Now to get energy into the carrier, to get the carrier particles moving, typically DPIs use energy from the user's inhalation. So the result of all this is that there are many factors which affect a typical DPI's performance. And when I say a typical DPI, I'm meaning a passive DPI using a carrier-based formulation. And performance, I'm going to say, is fine particle fraction, or FPF, and that's the percentage of drug which is coming out of the inhaler which actually makes it into the lung. So first of all, the design of the device is going to affect the performance. What's the deagglomeration principle? How's it getting the API off the carrier particles, and is that method any good? Has it been designed well? Then there's the air path design inside the inhaler. Are there lots of surfaces on which the API or the drug is going to get caught up and build up on? And also there's the airflow resistance of the device. So for a passive DPI, the airflow resistance is highly linked to the performance of the device, to the FPF. So as well as the design of the device, there's the user. How are they going to breathe in? Are they going to breathe in fast to start with or slow to start with? How long are they going to breathe in for? And because the device is using the energy from that breath, how much energy is the user putting into it? And the third thing affecting the performance of a typical DPI is the formulation. So this is the drug and carrier blend. What's the dose content uniformity of that formulation? How evenly is the drug spread throughout it? What's the stability? So not only have you got to ensure that the drug is stable over a period of time, you've also got to make sure that the drug is stable while it's with the carrier for a long period of time. And then also, what's the consistency of the separation forces? So how consistent is the force required to take the API off the carrier particles? And all those are in turn affected by what's the drug, what's the payload, what's the type of drug, what's the carrier, what's its bulk properties, what's its surface properties, and also how are you blending it, how long are you blending it for, and what type of mixer, and what's the batch size. So there's a huge myriad of factors affecting the performance, and this leads to significant development time and costs, just getting that formulation right, just making sure you've got the right dose content uniformity, making sure it's stable, and making sure the separation forces are right, and that they're going to work with your design of device. So that's a huge amount of time and cost goes into developing that. Because you're relying on the user's breath to power the device, you're going to get an inherent dose-to-dose variability, and sometimes a significant dose-to-dose variability. And also because it's a passive device, you get an inefficient use of energy. So typically, for high performance, you want a high resistance device, because a high resistance device means you can get high pressure drops around the powder, or you can get high velocities of air around the powder to aerosolize it. However, users tend to want a low, medium to a low resistance device, so you've got a conflict there. The result of all this and of other factors is that the fine particle fraction for a typical passive DPI is between 20 to 40%, so only 20 to 40% of that API coming out of the inhaler actually gets into the lung. The rest of it is being deposited in the mouth and throat, which can lead to all sorts of problems and side effects, especially if you're delivering steroids. A major cause of it landing in the mouth and throat is that the API hasn't come off the carrier particles. So the device hasn't been able to get the API off the carrier particles. The carrier particles are too large to go into the lung, and so they land in the mouth and throat still covered in API. So what happens now if we get rid of that carrier blend and we just use pure drug? Well, there are fewer factors affecting performance. Now no longer have to worry about the carrier, what type of carrier it is, or what the mixing process is. And you don't have all these issues associated with formulation. So you don't have to worry about dose content uniformity, you don't have to worry about the stability of the drug with the carrier particles. Of course, you still need to worry about the stability of the drug, but you don't have this extra stability burden. And you no longer have to worry about the consistency of the separation forces. So in theory, if you're just delivering pure drug and not a carrier blend, the world's got a little bit simpler. You've got massively reduced formulation time and cost, because you're not trying to get that carrier blend right. There's the potential to remove the particle engineering step entirely, and I'll talk a bit more about that later. We've also got the possibility of higher payloads, because obviously you're not bulking out the drug with carrier particles, so you can load more drug in there. And you've also got the removal of performance problems directly associated with carriers. And by that I'm thinking about the API staying attached to the carrier particle and landing in the mouth and throat. So API-only delivery is good. Active delivery is a way of achieving API-only delivery, and it also adds further advantages. So active delivery, as I said, it's got its own power source to aerosolize the drug. So that could be a battery with a piezo vibrator, or it might use compressed air, it might use chemical energy, or there might even just be a spring inside there, a preloaded spring which moves some rotors or something like that. And it makes API-only delivery possible, not because it's got more energy than is available in a user's breath, but you can put the right kind of energy exactly where you need it to aerosolize the API. So now suddenly, as you're not relying on the energy from the user's breath, your device performance can be completely independent from the airflow resistance, which means you can tune the airflow resistance to be exactly what is good for your particular patient population. You've got highly efficient aerosolization now because you're putting exactly the right kind of energy exactly where you need it, and it's user independent. It doesn't matter how the user breathes in, what maneuver they use, or how much energy they put into it, which obviously is going to give you a higher dose-to-dose consistency because you don't get a variable amount of energy being put into it. But you get a higher dose-to-dose consistency primarily because of the more targeted use of energy. And if I show you, this is a schematic. This is a schematic graph. On the y-axis, we've got efficiency, or we can consider that as performance of the device. And on the x-axis, you've got energy going into the powder. And the performance curve typically look a bit like this for a dry powder inhaler. Now, passive devices tend to sit somewhere down at this end of the curve. So because they're operating on a steeper part of the curve, which means that for any variation in input energy, you get a big variation in performance. Active devices, because they can target the energy better and put it all into aerosolizing the API, you're operating on a further to the right, so on a much flatter part of the curve. So even if you had the same amount of variation of input energy, you get much less variation in the performance, which should lead to a much higher dose-to-dose consistency. The result of all this is that with an active inhaler, you can get fine particle fractions of well over 70%. Compare that to a typical DPI, passive DPI's performance of 20 to 40. So this is all good. Active DPI devices aren't anything new. As I said, they've been in development for over 2 decades. We've got Microdose Therapeutics' active DPI on the top left. That uses a battery with a piezo to aerosolize the powder. It's advertised as being able to deliver neat API or lactose blends or co-spray blends. On the top right, we've got the famous Exubera PDS developed by Pfizer and Nectar, which uses compressed air to deliver insulin, which is spray-dried with stabilizing excipients. On the bottom left, we've got Aspirair from CCL and Vectura, which uses compressed air to deliver drug. And then we've got the Inspiromatic on the bottom right, developed by Inspira Medical and recently bought by Opco Health, which uses a micropump and vortex to aerosolize fine particles independent of the patient's inhalation abilities. As yet, they're unproven commercially. They are yet to be on a pharmacist's shelves and stay there. There's a bit of a problem with perception, maybe, of active DPIs. They've been said to be expensive, complex in design, and therefore more prone to failure, and therefore unsuitable for use as disposable devices. And you also combine that with the fact that there are new devices which are passive, so they don't have any energy source within them, which offer the advantages, some of the advantages of which active delivery also offer, and these avoid carrier blends as well. So there's the Toby Podhaler by Novartis, which is a passive device, and that uses pulmospheres. So these are large, airy particles. It's a formulation technique. It's particle engineering technique which avoids using the carrier blends. Then there's the Arcus by Civitas, another passive device using specially engineered particles, large porous particles. So active devices are unproven commercially. There might be a bad perception around them, and there are new passive devices which are offering those advantages. So why would you pursue active delivery at all. I think active delivery really can change the future of dry powder inhalers, but it's going to take something really groundbreaking to change the standard of care. I think active delivery could transform the DPI market if it outperforms passive carrier-based devices, but from everything I've said, that should be a given. It could really transform the DPI market if we could remove the requirement for particle engineering entirely. So, i.e., we don't have to use special airy particles or special particle engineering techniques to get it to work. We can just use pure, dried, and milled drug. But I think more crucially, for active delivery to transform the DPI market, it needs to be of a similar cost to passive carrier blend devices. So if we look at our chart again of performance versus cost, if we can take the performance of active delivery, yet the cost of passive delivery, it could be truly transformative. So what's the opportunity if you can develop a device like this? Well, I think you can go well beyond the traditional markets of asthma and COPD. There are lots of therapies out there with pulmonary delivery being investigated, and imagine you can provide those therapies with a low-cost device, a high-efficiency device, a high payload device with low mouth and throat deposition. Then you can truly enable the use of DPIs across a wider range of therapies. Now, imagine you're a pharmaceutical company and you've got a new chemical entity, an NCE, and you're looking at pulmonary delivery. Dry powder delivery is already attractive because of the inherent stability of dry powders. Now, imagine with a device like this being able to massively reduce your formulation burden because you no longer have to worry about blending it with a carrier or getting the separation forces right, or the dose content uniformity right, or the stability of the device. You've already proved the stability of your drug. You don't have to prove the stability now with its carrier. So potentially you can get your drug into clinic much more quickly and much more cheaply. And then when you're in the clinic doing your studies, imagine now having the confidence that your results aren't going to be mucked up by using a device with only 20 to 40% delivery efficiency. Imagine having the confidence that you don't have to worry about the carrier blend mucking up the performance of your drug, and you don't have to worry about the user not inhaling properly. You can now use a higher performance device just using your pure drug, and which is completely independent of how the user is going to breathe in. So you should have better results and less variable results. And with better and less variable results, potentially could you get quicker and therefore cheaper clinical trials and get your drug into market more quickly. So in summary, there are challenges with API-only delivery, and those are primarily due to the small particle sizes. Active delivery can achieve API-only delivery and can significantly outperform passive delivery. And I think that the DPI market could be transformed by an active DPI which removes the requirement for particle engineering entirely and has a similar cost to disposable passive devices. So, to give you a little bit more information about Occoris, in 2013 we had an 8-month project in which we were proving the principle of Occoris, which is an active API-only engine. And we took it from a concept which didn't work, and we got it working, and we managed to get some benchtop, some in vitro test data from it using a next generation impactor, an NGI. And we were getting pretty good results. So from it we were getting a high FPF, a high fine particle fraction, and we compared our results to the results from a cyclohaler, so a typical passive DPI. So if we look at mouth and throat deposition, with the cyclohaler about 68% of the drug coming out was landing in the mouth and throat. With Occoris, it was around 22%, and we think we can do better as we get the technology a bit further. So the non-respirable fraction, so the particles coming out which were too large to get into the deep lung, cyclohaler around 8%, Occoris around 5%. And respirable fraction, so this is the fine particle fraction able to get into the deep lung. Occoris getting around 72% and cyclohaler around 22%. So we had about 3 times less mouth and throat deposition and about 3 times more respirable and high fine particle fraction. So that means if we're able to get 3 times more into the deep lung, we can load the device with 3 times less, which means in turn we'll get an overall 9-fold reduction in mouth and throat deposition. We also wanted to see how well Occoris was breaking up the particles, how well it was deagglomerating them. So we were testing our drug with pure micronized salbutamol sulfate, and we sent a sample of that drug off to a lab to be analysed for its size, to get a size distribution data for it from it using a Sympatec Rhodos and Helos system. And so this curve shows the size distribution, and the idea, and we can figure out how much Occoris is deagglomerating the powder from our test data. So the idea is if our test data matches well with this line, we are deagglomerating the powder well. So these blue dots are from our test data, so what is coming out of Occoris, and it pretty much shows that we are breaking up all the particles into individual particles. It's almost 100% deagglomeration. So what you put into Occoris comes out of Occoris. As I mentioned earlier, I think that for active technology to really be transformative, it needs to be of a similar cost to a passive DPI. So what we did is we worked up our concept for the single-dose disposable device, and in order to figure out how much it would cost to make. So this is our concept. It's a single-shot preloaded device. You take the cap off, you breathe in, and you get your dose, and then you throw it away. We calculated that you could make this for around 20 US cents, if not lower. And lastly, we did some high-speed video capture just to have a look at what comes out of Occoris. So this is a video of a plume of Lactohale L8300. So this is respirable grade lactose coming out of Occoris, and it's shown in half speed. Thank you very much for listening.